Soon after that strike that I told you about, the reporting about which got Abdullah Haider Shaya in prison, was the first strike in Yemen, as I said, in over 7 years. And it was followed up immediately by a series of a half a dozen or so strikes. And then throughout 2010 and 2011 and 2012 and 2013, the Obama administration has bombed Yemen. I went to Abyan province, where Majula is. I went there over a year after the missile had hit, and I interviewed survivors of that strike. And when we were there, more than a year later, you still could see the cruise missile parts in that village that were manufactured by General Dynamics and said, made in the USA on them. And we have that video that was taken not a week after, but more than a year after. It's still there. There are unexploded cluster bombs that are still peppering the countryside in Yemen. In fact, 2 days after that strike, some children were playing with one and they were blown up to pieces because they're colorful and they're yellow, and kids thought that they were a toy, and they picked them up and they were blown to pieces. When I got the list leaked to me by, that was the investigation of the Yemeni parliament, which is a pro-US entity. These tribal leaders had gone there, these parliamentarians. I have a list of the name of every single person killed at al-Majula. 46 people were killed. And I went down and counted them, and 14 were women and 21 were children. And the guy that they said that they were trying to kill, Mohammed al-Kazmi, they killed him. I investigated, who is this guy? He's a nobody. People in Yemen know him. He's a legendary mujahideen who had fought in Afghanistan. Yeah, he had said some stuff in support of al-Qaeda. He was an old man, an old timer. He wasn't a player in al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Why is it that the most powerful nation on earth rained cluster bombs and cruise missiles down on a poor Bedouin village to kill one guy who everyone says is just an old retired mujahideen that fought actually on the US side in Afghanistan? Was it that the US was fed bad intelligence by the regime in Yemen? There was pressure to do something about al-Qaeda, so they said, no one's going to care about this village. This is in the middle of nowhere. No running water. They're Bedouins. They're nomadic. No one will know the difference between a tiny Bedouin village and an al-Qaeda camp because no one's ever going to go there. That was the part that they didn't factor in, that someone actually would care enough to go there and look at it. And that person, that someone, is in prison right now. And so after they did al-Majula and they covered it up and they said Yemen did it, then they start bombing again. And on December 24th, 2009, they did another strike in a province called Shabwa province, and one of the people that they claimed to have killed in that strike was an American citizen named Anwar al-Awlaki, December 24th, 2009. Now, Anwar al-Awlaki, I knew his name going back to 2001 when I was a radio producer. I remember trying to book Anwar al-Awlaki on our show. Because Anwar al-Awlaki, you may have seen, many of you probably know who he is or heard his name. You've probably seen him on YouTube videos where he's wearing a camouflage jacket in front of the black flag, and he's calling for jihad against the United States, armed jihad against the United States. And he's calling on young Muslims to either conduct attacks in their own countries or come to the fronts of jihad in Afghanistan or Yemen or elsewhere. And there's a whole string of speeches that you can watch of Anwar al-Awlaki's that you will have almost no choice but to conclude that he was reprehensible. One of the things he did that I think was just unconscionable is that he published an article calling for the assassination of cartoonists that had drawn derogatory, demeaning pictures of the Prophet Muhammad. I think it was stupid for them to draw those pictures of the Prophet Muhammad, but I certainly don't think that you then say, I'm offended by this, you should kill this person. He called for the assassination of specific cartoonists, including a young woman in Seattle, Washington named Molly Norris, who had to change her name and go into witness relocation because Anwar al-Awlaki had called for her to be assassinated and published a hit list. Al-Awlaki praised the shooting of soldiers in Fort Hood, Texas by Nidal Hassan in November of 2009. The next day he wrote a blog post that said Nidal Hassan was a hero. He also praised the attempted downing of an airplane over Detroit on December 25th, 2009, the so-called underwear bomb plot. This deranged young Nigerian guy named Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib. And there have been leaks in the US press that al-Awlaki was operationally involved in planning that attack, and that he had directed Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib to try to bring down that airplane. Maybe he did. But we haven't seen any evidence publicly presented to suggest that that's the case. And if we're going to start assassinating US citizens on the basis of leaks and not hard evidence, and we're not going to give them a chance to respond to charges against them and not even charge them with a crime, then we should stop saying that we're the country that we are and rewrite our Constitution and say that for some people, we're not going to offer them any kind of right to due process. Because I believe firmly that a society is judged or should be valued based on how it treats the least of its people, how it treats the poor, how it treats the disempowered, but also how it treats the most reprehensible of its citizens. The story of Anwar al-Awlaki isn't so much about who he is as about who we are. If we want to make the standard how we treat the popular and the powerful and the rich, we're so morally bankrupt to the core. It's when you're challenged, when your democracy is challenged, that you rise up and say, this is who we are as a people. And so the case of Anwar al-Awlaki for me was the crossing of a line that is going to be very difficult to walk back from. I remember him in a different way than the camouflage jacket and saying the things that I found despicable and disgusting. I remember seeing him on television after 9/11. I was a radio producer trying to book him, and I remember him on NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. I remember him being on Talk of the Nation with Ray Suarez on NPR. I remember the Washington Post doing a profile about him, and they played these clips of Anwar al-Awlaki. He was an imam at a big mosque in Falls Church, Virginia. He's an American citizen who was born in Las Cruces, New Mexico. His father was a Fulbright scholar here in 1966. He's an imam at this big mosque after 9/11. And he was saying something that I think resonated with a lot of people, that we want justice for what happened on 9/11, and we want the perpetrators brought to justice. And he even said at one point that he believed that the United States had the right to go and hunt down and take out the people that were responsible for 9/11. But he also said, just because the United States has killed so many people in Iraq through the 90s with economic sanctions and the no-fly zones bombing, does not justify the killing of one US civilian in New York or Washington, D.C. It's a direct quote. And he was this guy who became a media celebrity. Why? Because he was caught between two worlds. On the one hand, he was horrified and outraged and condemned what happened on 9/11. And on the other hand, he was saying, don't declare war on the Islamic world. Don't start a witch hunt against Muslims. The day after 9/11, a woman stumbled into his mosque after being beaten with a baseball bat. He watched as Muslims were being rounded up and targeted, and as Guantanamo then was opened and people started getting abducted and brought to Guantanamo and put in orange jumpsuits. And he was being harassed by the FBI behind the scenes, and he eventually decided to leave Yemen. And I tell the whole story of many generations of that family in my book, so I won't go into every detail of it. If you're interested, you can look at it. But I will say this, that he is a product of US foreign policy. He was radicalized by the US wars, by the war in Iraq, by seeing the photos that emerged from Abu Ghraib, by the despicable stain that is Guantanamo, by the posturing against the Muslim world and Bush calling it a crusade. And he starts to become more and more sharp and radical in his critique of American foreign policy. And he starts to celebrate the victory of militant movements around the world. When the CIA's warlords were overthrown in Somalia in late 2006, he sent congratulations to them and said that it's like the Taliban government, that this is a great victory for Islam. He began to celebrate attacks against US troops, and he would record these sermons and he would post them around the world online so that they could go around the world, and people would make tapes of them. And his tapes start popping up in terror investigations, and people are saying al-Awlaki is inspiring lone wolf terrorists who want to kill Americans or kill Brits, and all around the world his sermons are popping up in these investigations. But it was all speech. It was all speech. And so al-Awlaki is becoming more and more popular from an increasingly disaffected young Muslim population around the world. And he is living with his family in Sana'a, Yemen, where his father was a government minister. And he has 3 children. The eldest was named Abdul Rahman, who was born in Denver, Colorado. And they're living there when he's arrested one day on trumped-up charges of intervening in a tribal dispute. And he's put in prison in Sana'a for 18 months without any real charge. The UN investigated it. They said it was an extra-legal detention of Anwar al-Awlaki. He's in solitary for 17 months. He's questioned by the FBI in this prison in Yemen. And he believed firmly that he was in that prison because the US was trying to silence him. What I discovered in reporting this book was that there was a meeting that took place when al-Awlaki was put into prison, that took place in Washington, D.C., between Bandar Bush, the powerful Saudi diplomat who's called Bandar Bush because he's so close to the Bush family, and Yemen's ambassador to the United States, and then a man named John Negroponte, who at the time was the director of national intelligence. And what I understand from people who were privy to that meeting, not John Negroponte, is that Negroponte said, we want al-Awlaki kept in prison for 4 or 5 years so that people forget about him. We want him to go away. So he was being kept in prison because of his words and because the U.S. wanted him to go away. While he's in that prison, his family, which is a very powerful family in Yemen, and their tribe, just like when Abdullah Haider Shaya was taken, the journalist, they go and they say, you cannot keep our son, as they called him collectively, in prison without evidence, without charges. If you show us evidence that he's complicit in any crime, the leader of the al-Awlaki tribe told the president of Yemen, we'll execute him ourselves. But if you don't have evidence, you have to release him. And the president of Yemen said, well, yeah, we don't have any evidence. The Americans just want him to stay there. And eventually they had to release him. So they release Anwar al-Awlaki, and al-Awlaki starts this blog called Imam Anwar's blog, and the internet became his mosque. And he becomes sharper and sharper. He emerged from prison a changed man. I read his prison writings, and they're fascinating. They limited the amount of literature that he could have. I mean, he was given a Quran. They gave him Shakespeare. He hated Shakespeare. Thought Shakespeare was sort of imperialist literature, wanted nothing to do with Shakespeare. But he adored Dickens, and he would compare figures in the U.S. and Yemeni government to like Uriah Heep and other, characters. And he would do food reviews, but he also about the hard bread called kudum and just talking about how you could hammer a nail with it. But he also was becoming much, much sharper. And so when he comes out, he starts this blog, and there's all this pressure on the Yemeni government to rearrest him. And in the beginning of 2009, he decides that he's going to go underground, and he's going to move to the hinterlands of Yemen because he doesn't want to be harassed every day by the Americans and their agents in the capital of Yemen. So he goes down there, and then his father is approached by the head of Yemen's intelligence service. And this guy says to him in May of 2009, if you don't convince your son to come back to Yemen, the Americans say they're going to kill him with a drone. And at this point, there was no Nidal Hassan shooting up Fort Hood yet. There was no underwear bomb plot. There was no video of al-Awlaki in a camouflage jacket calling for armed jihad. There was a guy who had a very, very radical take on U.S. foreign policy, whose rhetoric I didn't agree with. Some of it sounded very much like anti-war rhetoric, and some of it was way off the charts, but all of it was protected speech. And the United States decides that his speech was so dangerous and could potentially cause lone wolf acts of terrorists to be inspired, not directed, but inspired to commit acts of terrorism, that they said he's either in prison or we're going to kill him with a drone, May of 2009. So his father goes down to meet him in Shabwa province, where they're from. And he says, Anwar, the Americans are going to kill you if you don't come back. And he says to his father, how dare you? Are you an agent for the Americans now? You're going to have the Americans tell me which way to position, this is the phrase he used, which way to position my bed when I sleep at night. I was born free and I'll die free. And with that, he told his father to get lost. And that was the last time that his father spoke to him. And his father is this sort of extraordinary man who was a Fulbright scholar here, came to America with these dreams of raising his children in the spirit of American democracy. And I read all of his essays as a young student when he first came to the US in '66. And for him, it was so unthinkable that this was happening to his son because he didn't raise him that way. He didn't raise him to be the guy in the camouflage jacket. And I think he still believed in America. And he said, Anwar, we can resolve this. And Anwar said, if they're telling you they're going to kill me, I want nothing to do with them. And so al-Awlaki goes full-blown underground. And then the Nidal Hassan shooting happens. And then the underwear bomber happens. And then al-Awlaki is praising these actions and calling for people to do more. And so the Obama administration creates a task force set up explicitly to hunt down and kill Anwar al-Awlaki, an American citizen. And we learned that Anwar al-Awlaki was on the kill list in January of 2010 because the Washington Post put it on the front page. And they discovered that there were 3 Americans on the kill list. And among them was Anwar al-Awlaki. And by my count, the Obama administration tried to kill him about a dozen times. There aren't many funny moments in my book, but there are some insane stories that took place when the U.S. was trying to find al-Awlaki, and I'll just share 2 extraordinary ones with you. One is that Anwar al-Awlaki's other siblings are not like him at all. One of them is a beekeeper who makes delicious honey, and he's a wonderful guy, and he looks exactly like his brother. And when I went into their courtyard, I thought Anwar al-Awlaki is like not underground, he's making honey in Yemen, but anyway, so he's this wonderful, quiet, spiritual guy who makes organic honey, and he's an amazing guy. And then the youngest brother, named Ammar, works for an oil company and has like slicked back hair and Armani glasses, and he wears jeans and drives around in an SUV, and he likes to go to Europe. And so he works for this Austrian oil company, and in February of 2011, and I know all of these members of the family, and the al-Awlakis also, just so you understand where I'm coming from, allowed me to speak to all members of their family. I was allowed to interview all of the women in the family and to spend time with them. I spent an entire Ramadan with that family. And I got to talk to Anwar al-Awlaki's sister, who's a school teacher in Yemen, and to his mother, who got her GED in the United States and worked in a candy factory while her husband was getting his master's degree. And I really got to know this family, and I like them very much and think that they're upstanding people, which is why this story is so hard to tell. And so Ammar, who basically didn't know his brother at all because of the age difference, is in Vienna for business. And in February of 2011, the U.S. has already tried to kill his brother multiple times. And he had gone out for schnitzel with a colleague, and he comes back to the hotel, and he's up in his room, and he gets a phone call from someone saying, my wife and your wife are friends, and I wanted to drop off a gift for your wife from my wife. Can you come down to the lobby? So he comes down to the lobby. And there's this white guy in a crisp blue suit standing there, and the guy, they greet each other, and he says, I don't actually know you or your wife, and my wife doesn't know your wife, and I don't have a gift for you. And he says, my name is Chris, and Ammar says to him, was that your name yesterday? And they kind of have a laugh, and he says, I assume you know what we're here to talk about. And he said, yeah, my brother. And he says, Ammar says to him, are you FBI or CIA? And he goes over the second one, and he said, well, can I see a card? And he goes, well, we're not like the FBI, we don't have business cards. So he showed him a diplomatic passport. And they sit down, and he says, we are going to either kill or capture your brother, and at this point it looks like we're going to kill him unless we can find a way for him to surrender. And he offers Ammar al-Awlaki $5 million to give up the location of his brother. And Ammar didn't know the location of his brother at the time and hadn't seen him since 2004, but he's in this meeting with these guys, and he's saying, I don't know where he is, and they're pressuring him, and he says, I'll take a lie detector test, and they say, well, we have something better than that, and they bring over this like Blackwater type guy, this guy who was like apparently out of central casting. He was wearing one of those awful vests that Americans like to wear when they go on vacation, with the white socks and the Tevas. Sorry if anyone's rocking that look. No, but he's got the vest on, and he's got the wraparound sunglass, and he comes up to them and he says, well, this is a human lie detector. And so they talk, and then they give him a Hotmail account, not even a U.S. government account, and say they're going to be in touch. So while this is all going on, this guy named Morton Storm, who was a friend of al-Awlaki's in the earlier 2000s in Yemen when he was studying Arabic and was kind of an aspiring jihadist, sees that al-Awlaki is sort of in the news and that people are trying to kill him. And this guy he's Danish, and so he goes to the PET, the Danish intelligence service, and he says, I think I can help you find Anwar al-Awlaki. And so the Danish intelligence service tells the CIA, we have a guy that knows al-Awlaki. And so he starts this email communication with Anwar al-Awlaki on encrypted emails. And says to al-Awlaki, I want to help you find a wife to be with you underground because your wife is in Sana'a with your parents. And al-Awlaki says, oh, that would be good. I'd prefer to have like a convert and a European wife. Like he wanted her to be a convert, he wanted her to be, I know you can't make it up, European. So they actually put an ad on Facebook for a wife. This is all a CIA plot. They go on Facebook to put, find a wife. It's the CIA dating service. They find a wife for Anwar al-Awlaki, and women from all over the world start responding and sending in videos, and it was like sort of jihadi OkCupid or something. It was really sort of strange, and so this woman from Croatia who was originally a Catholic who converted to Islam and took the name Amina is chosen by this guy Morton Storm, which is also, you can't make that up. As sort of the one, and she records a video, and we have all of it. We have these videos and the emails. A video for al-Awlaki and sends him this video, and then he sends another video to her back, and he determines that, he says something to her like, you have to be able to live on the run with very little access to like toiletries and things, and living in a tent, and changing locations all the time, just what every woman wants. And so they decide that they're going to get married, and so Morton Storm flies Amina to Austria, where she's then going to get on a plane and fly to Sana'a, Yemen, to go and marry Anwar al-Awlaki. And she has no idea that the CIA is involved with this at all. No, none whatsoever. And so Morton Storm, by the way, this is sort of a sidebar to this. Morton Storm is paid I think it was $250,000, and he was given this briefcase by the CIA and Danish intelligence, and it has a code lock on it. And he said, what's the code? And they said, try 007. I mean, this is how cheesy these people are. Try 007. So he's got his 007 briefcase. He's got Amina from Croatia, who's going to go and marry Anwar al-Awlaki. And the sort of like cherry on top of this whole thing is that they give her this Gucci luggage with tracking devices in it as like a gift. And they say, just tell her it's a gift from you, Morton. And so he gives her this CIA luggage. And so she packs her things, and then she flies to Sana'a, and the CIA is thinking, great, we are going to be led directly to Anwar al-Awlaki by our Gucci luggage that Amina is carrying. So she arrives there, and she meets al-Awlaki's cohort, and these guys say to her, ditch the Gucci, new clothes for you, no jewelry, everything is gone, you have a new life. So they leave the CIA's luggage in Sana'a, and she disappears and marries Anwar al-Awlaki and has a child with him. So the CIA found a bride for Anwar al-Awlaki and facilitated him having another child while underground and being hunted by the most intelligent intelligence service in the world. That's pretty much the end of any funny story I have to tell you tonight. So while al-Awlaki is starting this new family, his original family is living in Sana'a, and they're trying to hunt him down. And in May of 2011, the U.S. very nearly kills Anwar al-Awlaki. They found him in a village in Shebwa. He's driving in a truck, and the U.S. deploys Predator drones and a Global Hawk surveillance. I understand that the Predators are made here in San Diego, as is the Global Hawk. So when we hear this story, remember there's a very serious local connection to the drone program. I'm sure many of you know that. So in May of 2011, they find al-Awlaki. They've got these drones, and they launch a missile at his truck, and it misfires, and it hits nearby, causes the vehicle to blow forward, and it blows out the back window of it. And al-Awlaki and those guys don't know that it's a drone that's going after them. They thought maybe they were being ambushed and it was an RPG or something. So they're speeding away they're trying to speed away. Another drone comes around, fires a payload, misses again. They're in this huge dust up, and they call for backup. And these two brothers, the Harad brothers, come, and they go to bail al-Awlaki out. They drive there, and they're in this huge smoke storm. And I talked to a JSOC guy, a Joint Special Operations Command guy, who was working the operation that night, and he said that the satellite, when they were looking at it, they couldn't see anything under it. It was just like ants, and then all of a sudden it was, because it's just two-dimensional imagery, there was just this big cloud. So this car pulls into the smoke. They only have one more missile left on one of the aircraft, and they're waiting to see what's going to happen. Al-Awlaki switches vehicles with these guys, and he drives one way and they drive the other. And so the U.S. operation planners had to decide which vehicle to hit. And they blow up the original vehicle, and Anwar al-Awlaki watches as they blow up these two guys that got into his vehicle, and he had gotten into theirs. And he survived that night and actually wrote an essay about surviving that night. And he managed to make it to the home of this other imam in Yemen. And he said, tonight 11 missiles missed their target, but the next one may hit.
Global Voices for Justice is a non-profit media organization. Our mission is to bring to you independent thinkers and analysts who enhance our understanding of the world we live in. Your financial support enables us to achieve our mission. With a minimum $12 contribution, you will receive a copy of this talk. Thank you.